My name is Ethan, and for most of my life I've been the guy who just does things. No fuss, no complaints, just getting on with it. Maybe that's why I never really got the spotlight in my family. That always seemed to shine squarely on my younger brother, Michael. He was the charming one, the one with the big ideas, even if those ideas rarely panned out. I was the steady Eddie, always there to pick up the pieces, to make sure the bills got paid, the lawn got mowed, the unglamorous but necessary stuff. Turning 40 last year felt like a milestone, not in a party hats and balloons kind of way, but more of a quiet, reflective moment. I'd built a decent life for myself. I had a comfortable little house in the suburbs of Chicago, a job in IT that I mostly enjoyed, and a few good friends. No wife, no kids, but honestly, I was okay with that. My focus had always been on making sure my parents were all right, especially as they got older. Michael, bless his heart, was always off chasing some new venture, usually leaving a trail of debt and broken promises in his wake. Guess who usually stepped in to help Mom and Dad out? Yep, that would be me. So, when Dad called me a couple of weeks ago, his voice a little too jovial, I had a feeling something was up. Ethan's son. Got some exciting news, he boomed into the phone. Oh yeah? What's that, Dad? I asked, leaning back in my office chair. Well, he started, drawing it out like he always did when he thought he was building suspense. You know how Michael's been, well, I chuckled. Yeah, I know. Last I heard, he was trying to start a drone delivery service for artisanal dog treats. Dad huffed. Right, that. Well, it seems he's finally landed on his feet. My eyebrows went up. Michael landing on his feet? That would be a first. Really? What's he doing now? He's inherited something, Dad said, his voice suddenly a little softer, almost reverent. Inherited? From who? Our family wasn't exactly rolling in dough. My grandparents had passed years ago, leaving behind mostly sentimental items. From Great-Aunt Mildred, Dad said. Aunt Mildred. I vaguely remembered her. A distant relative who lived out in California. I'd met her maybe once or twice as a kid. She was always a bit eccentric, but I never got the impression she had much money. Aunt Mildred? What did she leave him? I asked, genuinely curious. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. She left him her house. Okay, that was unexpected. Aunt Mildred had a nice little place in a retirement community in Palm Springs. Probably worth a decent amount. That's great for Michael, I said, trying to sound genuinely happy for him. He can sell it and finally get himself out of debt. Dad cleared his throat. Well, it's not just the house, Ethan. My gut started to clench. What else? She left him everything, Dad said, the words tumbling out quickly. Her savings, her investments, everything. There was a beat of silence on my end. Everything? You mean everything? Yes, son, everything. I felt a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. Surprise, definitely. A little bit of confusion. And if I was being honest, a prickle of something that felt a lot like disappointment. Wow, I said slowly. That's a lot. It is, Dad agreed, his voice filled with a kind of awestruck wonder. Apparently, Aunt Mildred was quite the savvy investor. We had no idea. And what about the rest of the family? I asked, the question feeling heavy on my tongue. What about you and Mom? Dad's tone shifted, becoming a little defensive. Well, she didn't leave anything for us, if that's what you're asking. But that's all right, we don't need it. We're just happy for Michael, right? Happy for Michael. The same Michael who had borrowed money from them countless times. The same Michael who had never seemed to take responsibility for anything. And now he was suddenly the recipient of a windfall. And what about me, Dad? I finally asked, the words feeling a little pathetic as they left my mouth. There was a sigh on the other end. Ethan, don't be so dramatic. Your brother just got a huge inheritance. This is big news for him. We're going to go out there next week to help him sort things out. So, you're going to Palm Springs? That's the plan. We'll be gone for a week or so. And that's it? I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. No mention of anything else? Anything else like what, son? Dad asked, feigning ignorance. Like, I don't know. The fact that I've been helping you guys out for years? That I'm always the one you call when Michael messes up? That maybe, just maybe, I might have expected some kind of acknowledgement. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, Dad sighed again, a long, weary sound. Ethan, we appreciate everything you do. You know that. But this is different. This is Michael's chance to finally get his life together. We need to be there for him. And what about me? I repeated, the question hanging in the air between us. Don't be so dramatic, Ethan, Dad said again, the tone sharper this time. We'll talk when we get back. We have to go now, your mother needs me. And with that, he hung up. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone. Don't be so dramatic. That phrase echoed in my head. It was like a punch to the gut. For years, I had swallowed my own needs, my own wants, to make sure my family was okay. I had always been the reliable one, the responsible one. And for what? To be told I was being dramatic when I dared to express even a hint of feeling overlooked? The injustice of it all started to gnaw at me. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the principle. It was about the constant, subtle message I had received my entire life. Michael matters more. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself I was being ridiculous. But the feeling persisted, a cold knot of resentment tightening in my chest. I spent the rest of the day going through the motions at work, my mind racing. I thought about all the times I had bailed Michael out, the times I had lent my parents money when he'd overspent, the countless hours I had spent helping them with things around the house. And what had Michael ever done? He'd charm his way through life, always expecting someone else to clean up his messes. And now he was being rewarded for it. That evening, I called my friend, Sarah. We'd been friends since high school, and she was one of the few people who really understood my family dynamics. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual, but I knew she'd hear the edge in my voice. What's wrong? She asked immediately. Sarah always had a knack for knowing when something was off. I sighed and recounted the conversation with my dad, ending with his dismissive words. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, she said, her voice laced with anger. That's unbelievable, Ethan. You're always the one who's there for them. And this is how they treat you. Pretty much, I said with a wry laugh. Apparently, I'm being dramatic for even suggesting that I might feel a little passed over. Passed over is an understatement, Sarah said. They're completely ignoring you. And the fact that they're rushing off to Palm Springs to fawn over Michael, it's just not right. Tell me about it, I said. I'm not even sure what to feel. Angry? Hurt? Just numb, maybe? You have every right to be angry and hurt, Sarah said fiercely. They're taking you for granted, Ethan. They always have. We talked for a while longer, Sarah offering her usual unwavering support. By the time I hung up, I felt a little better, but the underlying resentment still lingered. The next week crawled by. I knew my parents were in Palm Springs with Michael, no doubt celebrating his newfound fortune. I didn't hear a word from them. No texts, no calls. It was like I had ceased to exist. One evening, I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post from Michael. It was a picture of him standing in front of a beautiful Spanish-style house with a huge grin on his face. The caption read, "New digs. Thanks, Aunt Mildred. #blessed Palm Springs life." I stared at the picture, a wave of bitterness washing over me. He looked so carefree, so happy, oblivious to the fact that his good fortune had come at the expense of my feelings. A few days later, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was bright and cheerful, like nothing was wrong. "Ethan, honey, how are you?" she chirped. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "We're having such a wonderful time here with Michael," she continued, completely ignoring my tone. "The weather is gorgeous, and Aunt Mildred's house is just lovely. You should see the pool." I clenched my jaw. "Glad you're having fun." "Oh, we are. Michael is already making plans to renovate. He's got such great ideas." "That's nice," I managed to say. "Anyway," she said, her tone suddenly shifting, We wanted to let you know that we're going to stay out here a bit longer. Michael needs our help getting everything sorted. So, you're extending your trip? Yes, dear. Probably another week or so. Right? I said, the sarcasm dripping from my voice. Of course. Don't be like that, Ethan, Mom said, a hint of annoyance creeping into her voice. We'll see you when we get back. And just like that, the call ended. Another week. Another week of being completely forgotten. It was becoming clear that this wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about a pattern, a lifelong pattern of me being second best. As the days turned into weeks, the resentment inside me grew. It wasn't just about the money or the trip anymore. It was about the years of feeling invisible, of always putting others first and getting nothing in return. I started to think about my own life, about what I wanted. I had spent so much time taking care of everyone else that I had neglected my own needs and desires. One afternoon, I was at work when I got an email from my dad. The subject line was simply Michael. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. The email was short and to the point. It said that Michael had decided to sell Aunt Mildred's house and move back to Chicago. He was going to use some of the inheritance to start a new business venture. My parents were thrilled and would be helping him get set up. There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement of my existence. It was as if I was a ghost in my own family's story. That was it. Something inside me finally snapped. The years of being overlooked, the constant dismissals, the blatant favoritism. It all came crashing down on me. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked out of my office. I needed to get out of there, to breathe, to think. I drove to a nearby park and sat down on a bench overlooking the lake. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water. I watched the ducks glide across the surface, their movements serene and peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to really feel the depth of my hurt and anger. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made for my family. The birthdays I had missed, the vacations I had put off, the opportunities one had passed up. All because I felt obligated to be there for them. And what had it gotten me? Nothing but a constant feeling of being unappreciated and unimportant. I realized then that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep allowing my family to treat me like an afterthought. I deserved more. I deserved to be seen, to be valued, to be loved unconditionally. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, a sense of resolve began to form within me. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for sure: things had to change. I couldn't keep letting my family dictate my worth. It was time for me to take control of my own life and start putting myself first. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. And as I stood up and walked towards my car, I knew that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The kind of hope that comes from knowing you finally have the courage to stand up for yourself. The kind of hope that whispers, maybe, just maybe, things can actually get better. And that was enough to keep me moving forward, one step at a time. But little did I know, the real drama was just about to unfold. And it would involve more than just a forgotten son and a sudden inheritance. It would involve secrets, lies, and a betrayal that would shake the very foundation of our family. A few weeks after my park bench epiphany, life had settled into a strange kind of normalcy. My parents were back from Palm Springs, and Michael had indeed moved back to Chicago, full of grand plans for his new venture. Some kind of tech startup, the details of which remained vague. They hadn't reached out to me, and frankly, I hadn't expected them to. I was still processing everything, trying to figure out what my next move was. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Is this Ethan?" a woman's voice asked. It sounded older, a little frail. "Yes, speaking. Who is this?" "My name is Eleanor. I was a very close friend of your great Aunt Mildred." "Aunt Mildred?" I hadn't thought about her in weeks. "Oh, hello, Eleanor. It's nice to hear from you. I'm calling because Mildred asked me to," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "She wanted me to contact you after everything." My heart skipped a beat. After everything? What do you mean? She knew. She knew your parents and Michael would likely not tell you the full story, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My mind started racing. What full story? What was there to tell? I don't understand, I said, my voice tight with anticipation. Mildred. She cared about you very much, Ethan. More than you know, Eleanor continued. She always told me you were a good boy, a kind soul. She saw how much you did for your family, and she worried about you. A lump formed in my throat. This was unexpected. She left something for you, Ethan, Eleanor finally said. I was stunned. She did. My parents had made it sound like Michael was the sole beneficiary. Yes, she had a separate will, just for you, Eleanor explained. She didn't want your parents to know about it until after Michael had received his inheritance. She was afraid they would interfere. Interfere? What was going on? What did she leave me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She left you her journals, Ethan, Eleanor said. Years and years of them. She said they would explain everything. There at her house in Palm Springs. She asked me to give you the key and the address. My head was spinning. Journals? Explain everything? What could Aunt Mildred's journals possibly explain? Why didn't she just tell me herself? I asked. Eleanor sighed. Mildred was a complicated woman, Ethan. She had her reasons. She just wanted to make sure you got them privately. She gave me the address and told me where to find the key. I thanked her, my mind reeling, and hung up the phone. Journals. A separate will. My parents interfering. It didn't make any sense. But a seed of suspicion had been planted. What were my parents hiding? The next day, I booked a flight to Palm Springs. I had to know what was in those journals. I had to understand why Aunt Mildred had kept this secret from my parents. The house was exactly as I remembered it. A charming little bungalow with a vibrant garden. I found the key where Eleanor had said it would be, tucked inside a ceramic bird feeder on the porch. Stepping inside, the house felt strangely familiar, filled with the scent of lavender and old books. I found a box in the attic labeled Ethan's Journals. My heart pounded as I lifted the heavy box and carried it downstairs. I spent the next few days immersed in Aunt Mildred's journals. Her handwriting was elegant, looping across the pages, telling a story I never could have imagined. She wrote about her life, her travels, her thoughts, and her observations about our family. And as I read on, a shocking picture began to emerge. Aunt Mildred had always been aware of my parents' favoritism towards Michael. She had seen how they overlooked me, how they dismissed my accomplishments, how they always seemed to prioritize Michael's needs above my own. But that wasn't the biggest shock. The biggest shock came when I reached the last few journals. In them, Aunt Mildred revealed a secret that had been kept hidden for decades. Michael wasn't my parents' biological son. I stopped reading, my hands shaking, my mind refusing to process the words on the page. Michael wasn't my brother? I went back and reread the entry, then the one before it and the one before that. The story unfolded in Mildred's meticulous handwriting. Years ago, my parents had struggled to conceive. Desperate to have a child, they had considered adoption. But then, a young woman, a distant relative, had reached out to Mildred. She was pregnant and unable to care for the child. Mildred had acted as an intermediary, connecting the young woman with my parents. They had taken the baby in, raised him as their own, and never told anyone the truth, including Michael. Mildred had kept the secret all these years, out of respect for my parents' wishes. But she had always felt a deep sense of unease about it, especially as she witnessed their blatant favoritism towards Michael. She worried about the impact it would have on me, knowing I was their biological child. That's why she had left me the journals. She wanted me to know the truth, to understand why things had always been the way they were. She wanted me to know that I wasn't imagining things, that there was a reason for the imbalance in our family. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. It explained so much: the unwavering support for Michael, the constant excuses for his failures, the subtle but persistent feeling that I was somehow less important. I felt a surge of anger, not just at my parents for keeping this secret, but at the years of emotional neglect I had endured. They had chosen to shower their love and attention on a child who wasn't even biologically theirs, while I, their own son, had always been relegated to the sidelines. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, rereading the journals, trying to come to terms with this earth-shattering revelation. That evening, I called Sarah. "You won't believe what I just found out," I said, my voice trembling. I told her everything about Eleanor's call, the journals, and the shocking truth about Michael's parentage. Sarah was speechless for a moment. "Ethan, that's insane. I can't believe it." "I know," I said. "It explains so much, but it also makes me so angry. All those years, all the times I felt like I wasn't good enough, like I didn't measure up, it wasn't about me at all. It was because I wasn't their real son." "Oh, Ethan," Sarah said softly, "that's awful. You didn't deserve any of that." "No, I didn't," I agreed, the anger bubbling up inside me again. "And I'm not going to pretend anymore. I'm not going to keep quiet and let them continue to treat me like this." I decided I needed to confront my parents. I booked a flight back to Chicago for the next day. I couldn't wait any longer. They needed to know that I knew the truth. The next evening, I walked into my parents' house. They were surprised to see me. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" Mom asked, a look of mild annoyance on her face. "I came to talk to you," I said, my voice cold and steady. Michael was there too, lounging on the couch, looking as carefree as ever. "Hey, Ethan, what's up?" I ignored him and focused on my parents. "I know about Michael." Their faces paled. Dad's newspaper dropped to the floor. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Michael looked confused. What are you talking about?" Dad stammered. "I know he's not your biological son," I said, the words hanging heavy in the air. The room fell silent. My parents stared at me, their eyes filled with a mixture of shock and fear. Michael looked from them to me, his brow furrowed in confusion. How did you find out?" Mom finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Aunt Mildred told me," I said, watching their reactions. "She left me her journals." Tears welled up in Mom's eyes. Dad looked like he had been punched in the gut. "We were going to tell you someday," Mom said, her voice choked with emotion. We never found the right time." "The right time?" I scoffed. "You've had 40 years, and you were going to tell me when exactly?" "It was for your own good, Ethan," Dad interjected, his voice strained. "We didn't want you to feel any different about Michael." "Different?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I've always felt different. My entire life, I've felt like I wasn't good enough, like I didn't belong. And now I know why." Michael finally spoke up, his voice filled with disbelief. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" My parents looked at him, their faces etched with guilt and sadness. Mom reached out and took his hand. "Michael, honey," she said softly, "there's something we need to tell you." And then, in hushed tones, they told him the truth. They told him about the young woman, about Mildred's help, about their decision to raise him as their own. Michael listened in stunned silence, his face pale. When they were finished, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and something else, something that looked a lot like shame. "Ethan, I had no idea," he stammered. "Of course you didn't," I said, my voice laced with bitterness. "Why would you? You were always the golden boy. You got everything you ever wanted." "That's not fair, Ethan," Michael protested weakly. "Isn't it?" I asked, my gaze fixed on my parents. "You lied to me my entire life. You let me believe that I was somehow less worthy of your love and attention. And for what? To protect a secret. We loved you both, Ethan," Mom said, tears streaming down her face. "We always have." "No, Mom," I said, shaking my head. "You loved him. You tolerated me." The words hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken emotions. "What do you want, Ethan?" Dad finally asked, his voice weary. I want the truth, I said. And I want you to acknowledge the pain you've caused me. We talked for hours that night. It was a difficult and emotional conversation, filled with tears, anger, and years of pent-up resentment. My parents tried to explain their actions, to justify their silence. Michael sat quietly, listening, trying to process the information he had just received. By the end of the night, nothing was truly resolved. The years of damage couldn't be undone in a single conversation. But for the first time, the truth was out in the open. The secret that had haunted our family for so long was finally exposed. In the days that followed, things remained tense. Michael was quiet and withdrawn, grappling with the reality of his parentage. My parents tried to reach out to me, but the trust had been broken. I needed time and space to process everything. I decided to take a break from Chicago. I booked a trip to Europe, something I had always wanted to do but had always put off. I needed to get away, to clear my head, to figure out what I wanted for my own life. As I traveled through different countries, exploring new cultures and meeting new people, I started to gain some perspective. I realized that my parents' choices were about their own insecurities and fears, not about my worth. Michael, too, was a victim in his own way, having lived his entire life based on a lie. When I finally returned home, weeks later, I felt different. The anger and resentment were still there, but they weren't as all-consuming. I knew I couldn't erase the past, but I could choose how I wanted to move forward. I had a long conversation with Michael. He was still struggling with the revelation, but he was also trying to understand my perspective. We talked honestly and openly, and for the first time, I felt like we were actually connecting, not as brothers bound by a lie, but as two individuals trying to navigate a complicated situation. My relationship with my parents was still strained. We had a few more conversations, but there was a distance between us that I wasn't sure could ever be fully bridged. They had made their choices, and I had to make mine. I realized that family wasn't just about blood. It was about love, respect, and honesty. And for too long, those things had been missing from my relationship with my parents. I decided to focus on building my own life, surrounded by people who valued and appreciated me for who I was. I reconnected with Sarah, and our friendship deepened. I spent more time with my other friends, nurturing those relationships. The inheritance that Aunt Mildred had left Michael remained a touchy subject. He offered to share some of it with me, but I declined. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle.